Okay, so this video is going to go through the PHP logic and explain what's going on in the scripts that we're using. Mainly we'll be going over the form validation script because it's the larger of the two scripts, and it'll give you a better idea of the programming logic that goes into the files. So here are the PHP files from the form validation zip file. So if you unzip those, you'll have index.php, savedata.php, sendmail.php, database.sql. If we go to our Apache site, we're still using the index.html file. The previous video, the setup, you should have changed over the permissions so you can write to the varww folder. Here is FileZilla. I just logged into my virtual machine. Here is varww html, and that's what this file is. I ran those commands to change it myself to the owner so that I can actually upload to this directory. Otherwise, it's limited to root, and you can't log in as root. So that's a security feature. So we had to set that folder to my username as the owner, so I can upload files to change files in there. So once you do that, you can change these around. And also in that video I mentioned the default files are index.html, and if that doesn't if that's not there, it'll look for index.php, and if that one's not there, it'll finally look for index.htm. So by default, it'll show this file right here. I'm going to go ahead and upload the files from form validation zip. So all those files, you don't need the SQL one because we're going to use that in PHPMyAdmin, and this doesn't really need to be processed or anything by the server, so I'll leave that one off. So here's my index.php. Like I said, by default it looks for index.html first, so it won't load that unless we tell it to. Right? Or if we want that to be the default page, we would just have to remove this file. Or you can rename it. I'm going to just leave it there and rename it and just call it .bak for backup. It's a backup. So now that that's deleted, quote unquote deleted, refresh. There we go. Sometimes if you have the cache, it'll cache the file, so you need to refresh. Or is it Control F5 or hard refresh, I think. Anyway, so here's our form. This is what it looks like. This is the index.php file that it's reading. And in here is a mix of HTML and PHP. The file starts off with some HTML that should look familiar. Here's a chunk of CSS right here to color code our errors. This editor that I'm using, it's Notepad+. I like this one, like I mentioned, because it does syntax highlighting, and then it also has line numbers, which help when you're trying to fix problems. Okay, so this file starts off as HTML, so that should look familiar. And then, just like if you were going to add JavaScript, you have a PHP script tag. So that's less than $PHP. So then anything in there is considered PHP and is processed that way until you get to the closing tag, which is another question mark and greater than sign. So this is a block of PHP script. This editor also lets you collapse these, which is kind of nice. So if we close that, then we go back to just regular HTML. Now this section has where our form is created. And then interspersed in here, we use some more PHP. So here we tell it the form action. We tell it to use the server variable PHP self, which just means index.php. But if we were to rename that something else, instead of having to change that here, we just call PHP self, and it just knows to use this itself as the form processor. So submit it to itself, basically. Here's some input tags. If we were creating a form for the values, we set them equal to these variables. This just lets you maintain any data that they've already submitted. So we have a form field called name, and when we submit our form, we save that, assuming it passes, it's not blank, right? So right here we have a section that checks to see if it's blank or not. But if it isn't blank, we save that input to the name variable that we created in PHP. And then we use that to set the value here. And that's just so that when we're using our form, if we type in anybody who types in any information, it'll retain that information once we've submitted the form. So that if you view the source, you can go in here and see that it's set up here. So we entered that in, and then it resets it to what we entered. So that's kind of nice. We do that for the other form fields in here. The email type is a drop down. Oops. So that's a drop down. Right now, if we look at the code, nothing was chosen. It was blank. So we told it if this is set, email type is set, and it is equal to blank, then the option that is selected should be choose. So if we view the source on this, we can go down here and we see selected. So it just writes out selected because it's blank. We haven't chosen any answer yet. So if we check work, and we submit this, we can go back and look at it here. Now work is selected. So it just maintains the data that people entered, so they don't have to enter it in over again. Same thing with phone type, home. That's a radio button, but we maintain that. And this checkbox as well. We submit those. We can go back and see in the source. It retains that by marking it checked. So phone type, home, checked. I agreed to the terms, checked. Yes, I agreed to the terms already. So that's what this code down here is mostly doing. It's just retaining the values that people have submitted in the form already. And then down here in this other chunk of code, just outputting the form variables. that we have submitted. It's just good for testing. So on the form, you can see them popping up down here. We'll add in a comment. So this is a test. So this is, you can keep this in here. It's optional. Mostly, like I said, it's for testing. You can comment them out individually. So if you're adding comments, or just kind of like HTML, you can comment out whole sections. Same thing with like JavaScript. More like JavaScript, I guess. You can comment out this whole section. You can save that, re-upload that to the virtual machine, overwrite, and then if we were to go back here, all that would just be gone. That's how you can get rid of that. But like I said, it's nice to see what is actually being entered sometimes. So you can put that there in case there's any processing that goes on and you're expecting these variables to have something else in mind than what is actually entered. It's good to see if something like that is happening. So let me uncomment this. Save that. Control S to save inside Notepad++, like most programs. Upload that back to the server. Submit. And so here's our input back there at the bottom. Okay, so that's that. Let's go back up to this PHP script where we're starting off our code. We have 2 lines that say require. We're requiring these 2 extra files. One of them saves our data. The other one sends the email. So the keywords are in yellow. These are PHP keywords specific. So if statements, as empty is a built-in function, require is a command. If we go to the tutorial at w3schools.com, it's nice because it has it all broken into sections. So if you scroll down to PHP include, so we have include statements or required statements. This will tell you the difference. So if an include file is missing, it'll just give you a warning, but if a required file is missing, it'll completely stop the script. So we're requiring that these 2 files be included. So here's a statement for error reporting. It just tells you the level of error reporting. Down here we have some variables that we created. So we have name error, email error, phone type errors. These variables hold the error strings that we display on the screen to the user, and it has a matching variable that holds the form data that is entered. And we also have another variable called boolean errors. Boolean is the variable type. Errors. Boolean just means it is a true-false value. So if we go to W3 Schools again, you'll see about declaring variables. Those are start with a $sign. It gives you the rules for variables right here. The data types, strings, integers. It just helps you know how to use the different types. So I was talking about strings. We're just put those in quotations. Here is a boolean. They represent true and false. And in our example, I use that as a flag to check to see if there are errors with the form. Okay, so to look at the form again, this is an example of an error message, email error, phone error. If we go a little bit further into the code, this first if statement, if server request method equals post, that just checks to see if the form has been submitted. We can read more about that on the W3 Schools site again. Under the form validation, I believe it's down here at the bottom. It talks about other of these super globals, it calls them. I'll show that in a second. So here's the if it's been submitted, we're checking to see if the server request method is post. That means somebody submitted the form. Like I said, you can look at super globals. Those are variables that start with this. And there are variables that let you see things that go on the server. So here's the server ones. Here's the ones that have to do with requests. When you're requesting a page, here's post variables. If you're using get for your form, so on and so forth. Cookies, you can set cookies, session variables. If you scroll down, you'll see here's the server one. We're talking about server request method. And a little further down, we can see the post, and that's when we're actually grabbing the values from our form. So check to see if the form has been submitted, and then we're going to look at the form field name. So if we go back to our HTML section right here where we had the form, so you can see again name, right? So the name input field name, that's where we're putting the name, email for email, so on and so forth. So that's what it's testing. The form field name, we'll check to see if it is empty. So is empty is a built-in function to PHP. I didn't see that. Oh, here it is. It just mentions it right there. But you could also, I've also included this in here. This one's built-in PHP functions. You can go to the ease, scroll down till you get to empty, and read about that function as well. So that's what that's doing right there. It's checking to see if this field is empty. Because we said that it was a required field, right? So over here, we said that was a required field. Name's required, email's required, email type is required, phone's required, phone type's required, and the terms is required. So we're checking right here to see if that form field is empty. If it is empty, we set our name error message to name is required. We'll flag it as the form having errors. Errors equals true, and then it'll keep going down the line processing other statements. You can see here email has the same thing, so check the email. It's required, yes. Flag it if it's blank. Email type, yes. Flag it if it's blank. So it's just basically repeating the same kind of section code right there. And then this is all part of a if-else statement. So if we go back here, we can look at if-elses. So in simplest form, if this condition is true, then do something within these braces. If else is if the condition is true, do this. If false, do this instead. So it gives you a second option. And then you even have if, else if statements, which give you unlimited things to test, but it's easier to work with these. So here we go. We test it. If it's empty, we do this. So the opposite of not empty is it contains data. So if this is empty true, okay, then do this. But if empty is false, that means it has data in that form field. Then we're gonna save that input into our name variable to hold our form input after we send it through the test input function. So this is an example of a function call. Now this is a function that W3 Schools wrote to protect the input that people are putting into the form, or to sanitize it from bad characters that might try to break the form. So we clear off white space at the beginning and ends with trim, strip out any slashes and special characters. We format it to sanitize the data, basically, so like hackers couldn't try to break the form. So we first do those operations on it, and then we save it to our name variable. After that, we have another if statement that we test, and this one is a perform regular expression match. So this is also kind of an advanced feature, but it talks about it in that W3 Schools validation. I think it might be in here. Or definitely in this one. So the regular expression is what we're testing, and this one has a built-in one for emails inside PHP, and this one talks about the regular expression for testing the URLs, and that just makes it fit a certain format, right? So we always want email addresses with an @ sign, and we want web addresses with HTTP or HTTPS, or even it'll accept FTP. So if we go back to our other functions list, we can look at those. Preg match. Okay, so this is a list of all the built-in functions, which is pretty huge. Oh, I passed it. Okay, so preg match off are global regular expressions, and that just tells you, so it's going to perform a regular expression match. We use it, give it a pattern, and then we have it test to some value. So in our PHP file, I also included this link that helps you test out regular expressions, and it kind of will teach you about regular expressions if you're really interested. They're kind of tricky. Even I still have problems with them, so I like this site because it lets you test out regular expressions. So this regular expression is testing just uppercase letters A through Z. And then match any word with the alphanumeric. Watch one or more preceding tokens. This is global. It tells you different modifiers and stuff. And then all these different sections over here will talk about groups. So if you put things in parentheses, or if you beginning of the word, not the word, so on and so forth. It'll just let you test them out. One of them that I was having problems with that doesn't quite work right was the phone number one that I wrote. I'll show you that when we get down there. But just to see how these regular expressions work for the email and the website one, we can test it real quick. But it's similar to this up here with the name. So we couldn't enter in just garbage because it's invalid. We can't even put in just google.com. It actually wants the HTTP. Yeah, that's good. The S is good. And then the expressions that they chose also allows FTP, which is kind of weird, but that's still valid. But it'll stop you from just entering in nonsense. Same thing with emails. It'll validate my email address. So here's the phone. So the phone, like I was saying, it should just match on 3 digits dash 3 digits dash 4 digits, right? That's a good phone number. And then, but unfortunately, it also matches on that as well, which is not so cool. So I was trying to fix it in my code. Down here with the phone number. So it should just have 3 digits dash 3 digits dash 4 digits. And if I take that, go over here and play with it, so this global one, I'm not using the global one, so you can take off the global, and then this is where you can test different text. So oh, that's not a match. 3 digits, 3 digits, 4 digits. Yep, that's a match. 3 digits dash 1 2 3 4 5 digits, 4 digits. That's not a match. 3 digits dash 3 digits dash too many digits. That's still not a match either. Yeah, the global just has it keep, like, so in this case it's a big old block of text, right, like a comment field, so it'll keep checking everything. If I turn that off, it just matches the first occurrence. There's other characters and stuff that you can, there's where it talks about the flag, different flags, multi-line, where we were just at over here. Substitution, quantifiers, and alterations, plus sign, watch one or more of the preceding, and it gives you examples, star, 0 or more. So I told it to match exactly 3 of that. Anyway, so I wasn't quite sure why that wasn't working, but if anybody can figure that out, it's like a bonus points for you. But here is that technically it should just stop here and validate that and be good to go. But if you were to put in something else, it would flag it because it doesn't have the dashes. Even if it's 1, 2, 3, it wouldn't like that either. So that mostly works. So that's what these regular expressions do, right? So you first phone was required, so we talked about that already. Else, if it is filled in, so yeah, let's process that data. So we make sure it's sanitized so it's not going to break our script through that function. We'll save it to our variable. Then we'll check that variable against a regular expression and see if it matches a specific pattern. Okay, so if it matches, it would be true. So we would do that, but we want not matches. So that's what this little exclamation point is. We go back here and we look at our operators. We got mathematic operators, arithmetic, plus, minus, multiply, divide, so on and so forth. Assignment operators, that's when we say our variable equals some string. So we've seen that one. Here's some logical or comparison operators. Here are the logical operators. So this is the not. So true if our variable is not true. So we just said not. It's the opposite basically. And here is some string operators, the dot and the dot equals, which we'll look at in a second. So perform this match. This would be true if it matched, but we want the cases where it's not true. So that's why we put the not. And if it's not true, then give them an error and then flag it as the form has errors. Okay, so then moving along, we have phone type. So phone type was required, but there's no any kind of validation on that because if we go back to the form, phone type was just radio buttons. Same thing with this checkbox. So phone type, we're only making sure that it is filled in because it's required. If it is filled in, then we just sanitize the input and save it to our variable. Our terms, the same thing. Make sure it's required. If it is, we just sanitize the input, save it to our variable terms so we can use it later. And if it makes it through all those, right, and it's no errors, because in the beginning we had no errors, but if we process the form when we come across errors, we'll change the errors to true. So here's another use of not, right? So if our errors variable was true, we would process this, but we want no errors, right? So false being no errors. If that's the case, then we process this information. So that's what we want to do. If there's no errors in the form, do this. So if that's the case, we assign a recipient variable to who's going to get our email. Right, we have a subject that we added, a visitor feedback form, and we have the body for the email. This is where we're using those concatenate operators. So here is sent. That's just a string that we have, sent, colon, dot, add in the date time. Dot, add in a break for a new line because we're using HTML. We can use HTML in the email. And then we add we take that line, we add in this to it, so it's an append. If we go back here, you'll see it talks about that. So here's putting these two together, and this is like an append. So just tacking on more to the same variable. So here's the first value of the variable, then we take what was in there before, and we add this, we take what we've already added and keep adding as we go all along till we finish in adding all those fields from the form, right? So those are all saved in these statements right here. So website, that's where we saved our website, that's where we saved the comments, that's where we saved the phone. So we're just putting those together in a big long string basically that we can pass to our functions down here. So here are two functions that we created to send email and one to save data. If we go to our send mail file, you'll see it has our beginning PHP tag. Here are some statements that we need for this PHP mailer code that we're using. That's some code that creates email basically a email object to send email, and we'll give it some variables and set it up so it can send emails. So we're using this is the required code for that. But here's our function send mail. We're going to pass it some variables, some arguments. If we go back to our functions, user defined functions, it talks about that. Here's an example with arguments that we're passing along. So we're going to call our send mail function. We're going to give it a from, we're going to give it a to, we're going to give it a subject, and we'll give it a body. So if we go back to index, our from is the email address because that's who submitted the form. Our recipient is what we defined right here. Let's use the to, the subject, and the body. So you can keep those the same, or you can rename them whatever you want. When it gets to the send mail, you're going to refer to it by these names inside this function. So they don't really have to match. And that's in the save data, they do match, I believe. Almost. But they don't have to match. You just know that whatever you pass it into, it becomes this. This is how you reference that, because you ask for arguments and when your definition, when you define your function. So it has these variables available to it, right? So here's our mail variable. We're using creating our email object using this code up here. That's in that src folder. That's all this group of files right here. So we create the email object. We set the settings for it. Simple mail transfer protocol. We use authentication. So you're going to use this the same. You're going to keep this the same. You won't have to change this. This is an email address I set up for everyone to use for testing email. So it's an account on my test server. So that should stay the same. You could play around with these. I just commented them out because I wasn't using them. But here we set the from, and we're setting the from to the variable that or the argument we passed up here. The to is equal to that to right there. The address, that's the recipient. Get reply to CC BCC. Is HTML? Yes, we set that to true. That's why we're able to use these BR tags inside our email. The subject, we set it to our subject. And then the body, we set it to body up here. And then if all goes well, we'll try sending the email. We should get back a message. That's a green message that says message has been sent. Otherwise, we get back an error, a red error like our other errors over here in our HTML form. That class error that we defined previously, or W3 schools defined previously, which is red, I believe. And so that's this file. So the save data file, this one is the one that's going to require some database, and I'll show you that in a second. First, let's go here. I'm going to comment this out temporarily. So I made a change, so I have to re-upload this to our virtual machine, because that's where the Apache is running. I go over here. So just to test this out, we should get a green message that says email was sent. So Chris, websites, no websites. Yes, this is a test. And message has been sent. Good. So that's working. Let me go back here, and then this, I will reverse the operation. So we're not going to send emails continuously. We're going to just test this data part. Let me upload this to update that change. So let me submit the same form again. So here's the error message you'll get if you haven't created your table. So here's table, test contact form doesn't exist. So it gives you a message. And in this case, it actually gives you the SQL statement that I was trying to use. That's because we told it to do that in our save data file, in our function. So in our save data function, it's going to try to connect to a database. Those are these lines up here. If you look at the code, it'll give you the error message from trying to perform that connection. So it'll say table test.contact form doesn't exist. So if you see that message, that means there's no database, or the database exists, I guess, but the table doesn't exist. So to remedy that, we're going to go to PHP my admin. I'm going to log in. So here's the test database. If you watched any of the other two videos, you've seen where we create that. We go to databases, create database, test. So this has the guestbook table in there that we had for the other application. To add in the table for our contact form, we're going to go to SQL. Oh, first we'll click on test, then we'll go to SQL, and it'll say run SQL queries on the database test. That's what we want to do. The database.sql file has the code, SQL code for creating a table. So this defines fields in our database. So this is an int. This is a timestamp, varchar. So these are like data types, just like PHP has. PHP has data types, and they're similar amongst all different languages because they hold the same kind of data. In our case, you can use this cheat sheet, or you can go to MySQL, and it talks about different data types. Numeric overview, numeric, datetime, strings. I'll include these links. But if we go back to our script here, we'll see that we have varchar just means variable character 250, so it can grow in size. Basically, a name field, well, it's going to be strings up to 250. So depending on the size of the data. Email, Terms is a Boolean field, which just means true false because that's a checkbox, so it's either checked or not checked, true false. Form data is a text field, which is equivalent to that comment field, comment box in HTML, how we created that, because it's multi-line. You can add a lot more text to it. These fields are limited in size, but this one you could add lots, so it's the same kind of thing. So I'm going to Control P to paste. So this is nice because if you paste something with an error, it'll give you an error message and let you kind of track down what the problem is. So this is going to define our table, our contact form table. We'll hit go. Green is good. Here's our table. This is a problem with PHP MyAdmin. You can ignore it. There's an update to get rid of that, but I haven't put that on there. We can look at the columns. So here's the columns for our form. If we go back to our form, it should all go away. Message has been saved. So now we can look at our database to verify that the data is actually in there. And here's our record we just created. So that's working. The other error message you might see if you haven't created the database is, I'll show you that in a second. So I'll click on the database. We can go to operations and we can say drop the database. You can do the same thing for a table. Operations. You can empty it or you can drop the table. I just got rid of that table we created. The database itself, operations. Drop the database, and you'll want to be careful. Make sure it says test database, because if you delete any of these other databases, you'll have to reinstall everything from scratch. So be careful what you're deleting. So I'm deleting the test database. So here's the message saying unknown database test and line 18 of our saved data.php file. So go back to here and look at line 18 of our. So here is the problem we're running into. We're trying to connect to our database, but it doesn't have the database name, doesn't exist because I just deleted it. So we can go back and add that real quick. So create a new database, test, and then we'll add in the table, just like we did a second ago. Control V. You can't do a paste in here. So we'll run that. Green is good. We'll go back here and test it again. This time we'll JSON. I'll pretend to be JSON. Should get blocked. Yeah. So I agree to that. Data has been saved. You can go back and look at it. Ignore. Here's that field we just created. If you edit that, it'll just show you. This is our terms. So Boolean is a. I think this talks about it as well. Numeric types. Boolean talks about is a synonym for tiny int. So that's why it says tiny int. Basically, it's a 0 is false, and anything not 0 is true. But we're going to limit it to 1s and 0s. Okay, so to recap, here's our function. Here's the variables where we connected to our database, the name of the server, our username and password, our the name of our database, the name of the form or the table that we're using. Here's our connection string where it connects to the server. That comes from W3 Schools Connect. You scroll down right here, so this is basically this chunk of code right here. Then here's our insert statement. If you go back to insert in that same MySQL section, it talks about inserting values. So these are SQL statements. So we're building our SQL statement insert into our table name. These are the table fields that we created right here. And then we're putting in the data. So this section, I'll have to re-upload the zip file for this because it's not right. If you get this, you might want to check it if you already downloaded and started using this, but this will be equals true, so this is an assignment. And what I want to do is a comparison. And this is also kind of funny because the string is agreed, right? So we set it to the value, so that's the actual name of the string. We'll look at our database and our data, terms agreed, right? So in our script here, it should say something like equals agreed. If that is the case, then make that value equal to 1, otherwise it's false, which is 0. But I just noticed I had that just set to true, which means set terms equal to true. And then enter in that, which technically also works because we already validated that in the form we wouldn't let you submit unless you agreed. So it's going to be true all the time. But technically this is not accurate. So I'm going to try to fix that. It should be equals agreed. So we'll say right here, we'll say equals false. A string, actually, let's just test it with something totally gibberish. So if it equals that, we'll mark it as checked, equal to 1, otherwise it'll be 0. And this is just to demonstrate. Let me upload this back again. We'll go back to our form, hit submit. We'll go to our data. So edit this one. Terms equals agreed, but our tiny int is 0. That's because we told it only if terms was equal to this. So instead I'll change this to agreed, which is what it should come across I'll resave this, upload that data. Let's retest it. Ignore, we should have a fifth one in here. Yes. So we'll edit that. And now since it actually matches agreed, it's equal to 1. That one is incorrect in the script. I have to re-upload that file with the correct. So you should say agreed like this because we're doing a comparison. We look at our operators. We're testing something. So this is an assignment with just 1 equals, and the operator was comparison means if this equals that, but we're comparing. So that's the difference. Otherwise, I just made terms equal to true, and then I said if this whole thing is true, then that, which worked in this case because the terms wasn't agreed. You had to agree to it in the validation, so everybody would be true. But if we were going to use that kind of setup for something else, you'd want it to actually be like this instead. So otherwise, so agreed, if it's actually a match for what we're expecting, put it as 1 for true or 0 for false. We'll close out that string, and then finally we execute that query, and we say here's our message that it's been saved in green. Otherwise, we give that error message. Normally, you probably wouldn't want SQL statements printed out, but since you're testing, you can leave it. This other statement here that I commented just has just the error message instead of the SQL as well. That's the difference there. And then we just close our connection to our database. But that's a rundown of the logic behind that script. The guest application is simpler. It does use some of the databases, but this is more comprehensive. But it'll be basically the same thing. That's it.